Hello there, God's masterpiece. It's me, Diana, from Through the Valley Therapy, coming to you from the Pod Populi studio in Boca Raton, Florida. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Holistic Counselor podcast. I am thrilled to have Marcken Volmy, who is a licensed mental health counselor, an EMDR trained and certified trauma therapist, and an EMDRIA consultant in training, and the author of Trauma Stories.
You got it.
With over 9 years of experience, his scope of practice involves helping people work through their trauma, anxious thoughts, and feelings of depression by incorporating EMDR therapy and EMDR intensives. Mm-hmm. I first had the pleasure of meeting Marcken through a networking group called Christian Mental Health Professionals. After encountering him, I was captivated by his insightful words, and it became evident to me that he possessed a wealth of humble wisdom. Recognizing his expertise, I extended an invitation for him to join the panel at our inaugural event hosted by the Mental Wellness Ministry at Grace Church called Calm Within. The focus of this event was stress management, a topic that aligns perfectly with Marcken's expertise. For those interested, you can find the link to the event in the show notes. During one of our networking gatherings, Marcken introduced us to an innovative technique called the flash technique, which was entirely new to me. I felt a sense of trust in Marcken and decided to give it a try, an uncommon feat for me. The experience proved to be remarkably intriguing, prompting me to dive deeper into it by signing up for a further exploration the following weekend. Marcken is not only a fellow brother in Christ, but also someone who, like myself, comprehends mental health through both lived experiences and extensive education. Marcken, your presence here is greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. What an intro. I appreciate it.
All right. So we're going to start with this quote that I love that you have on your email.
Okay.
Okay. And I also read the book. And and also Dr. Gabor Mate, I could tell we're both big fans of him.
Yeah.
Okay. His quote, "Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you." Mm-hmm. Can you explain to the audience what that means?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, trauma causes an impact, right? And that impact is expressed and felt differently between people. Take, for example, if you and I grew up in a home where our father was an alcoholic, he beat on our mom. We both are somewhat traumatized by it, but that expression will be different, right? So it's my job as the therapist is to figure out what happened to both siblings and how is that manifesting today within them. You can go on and live and grow up, forgive, heal, do the work, and grow up to have a normal life with your family, whereas I replicate the same thing, and I grew up to be an alcoholic. I internalize all the pain. I feel stuck. I feel like I can't move forward. And there's no particular rhyme or reason. Like, it's not because I had a smaller brain or something happened at birth. It's just that there are complexities to the mind that we can't understand, right? So oftentimes I tell people, whatever's manifesting, whether it's the addiction, whether it's the reclusiveness, the depression, the anxiety, that's not really the trauma. That's in effect caused by the trauma. The trauma is the foundational thing that led to that unhealthy behavior, which is just your way of trying to break free from being stuck, but you don't know how to. So you end up living your life like a cat chasing its tail. Right. Even in addiction, I never say, you know what, my job here is to stop the drinking, to stop the illicit drugs. I want to know, Diana, what happened?
Yep.
Let's go back to 8. Let's go back to 5, because that's where the trauma started. And then, but oftentimes people who are not in our field, they focus on what's manifesting. Oh, you're ruining your life. You lost your career. Why can't you stop doing this? But that's not the trauma. The trauma is that scared little boy, little girl who's never felt a sense of safety and connection and is still crying out for help, even as an adult.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's beautifully said. And you're right. It is understanding those wounded parts of us that we all have. I don't care how old you are. I have seen 82-year-old men who I could still see their that wounded child that they haven't taken care of yet.
Yes,
right. And
yes.
I know it sounds weird, but at the same time, it's true. I mean, we have our lived experience since we were in the womb. Mm-hmm. So I want people that are listening to understand what EMDR is and how does it work?
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I know it's a mouthful. It is a form of trauma psychotherapy modality that started by a woman by the name of Francine Shapiro back in the late 80s. It started off as EMD, and it eventually evolved into EMDR. She added the R and realized that the mind was actually reprocessing. It's a very safe way of processing trauma in a non-intrusive and invasive way. Mm-hmm. It started off as eye movements. I always tell clients, don't worry, you're not being hypnotized, but know that when you're in your REM sleep, your eyes are moving laterally, right? Because the brain is trying to reprocess whatever stress or traumas that you've gone through. But because of our neural cortex and the prefrontal cortex on the front of our brains, we get stuck. We have an inability to do so. That's why war veterans wake up with nightmares, because the brain is unable to recalibrate. But if you look at animals have this ability because they don't have the neural cortex like human beings. You know, like if an animal's in a fight or flight situation and they survive, it almost seems like they're playing dead, but they're actually in a frozen state. Right. And when they wake up, they'll shake it out like they're seizing. That's somatic. Yeah. We don't have that ability. So we wake up because we can't reprocess in REM sleep. So we wake up in terror, whatever that thing that's stored in our nervous system. EMDR, which is one of many trauma modalities, is my favorite, but I'm not going to pretend it's the only one. Okay. Right? That helps us to process the trauma it's like we're feeling it through. You have to feel trauma to process it because it's stored in your nervous system. Yes. But the goal of an EMDR therapist is to minimize the discomfort, minimize the sense of overwhelming emotions. It's not like we're concocting these new discomforts. They've been buried within us, but we don't know because there are 4 responses to trauma: fight, flee, freeze, and fawning, which is people pleasing. Mm-hmm. And depending where you're at on that scale, you have trauma. And most of the people who come to me have been in therapy for years. Yeah, me too. Right? Yeah. and they're like, therapy hasn't worked. And I would ask them what kind of therapy. And they usually say CBT or talk therapy. And it has its place. I'm not trying to discount it. I hope not, because I'm a CBT therapist and I do none. I've had EMDR done to me. Yes. And thank God. And that's why you're here, because I'm like, I need people to understand this. But I usually say is that, matter of fact, some clients come to me, they're still seeing their CBT therapist while working through their trauma. Because CBT deals with the prefrontal cortex, that area in your forehead, right? But the trauma typically lies in the limbic system, which is in the back of your head, and in the brainstem. Talk therapy can't go there because talk therapy is a talk down approach. We engage the cognitive part of our brains. Second layer, we evoke emotions, but we never hit that third tier, which is somatic, physically in the body. EMDR is different. It's a bottom-up approach. You first feel it physically, then it evokes emotions, and lastly, you hardly ever engage the cognitive side of things, right? So it's a safe way to process trauma through bilateral stimulation. You can do that through eye movements, butterfly taps. Some people follow a light bar. They put headphones on. They tap left knee, right knee, whatever. Or sometimes you hold on to tappers, these little video game controllers. That's what I did. I had the me too. The things in the hand and then the light at the same time. Wow. So I had both. It was just, They vibrate left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand. But why? Why would that work? Because the research shows when you're doing bilateral stimulation, activating left, right, you're activating both hemispheres of the brain at the same time. Okay. And when you're doing let's say the trauma we're processing is daddy left when you were 8. How'd you know? Wait, did you hear my story? You're actually starting to reprocess it. So if you're in a session with me, every 30 seconds or so, I would stop whatever bilateral stimulation I'm doing. I'll say, Diane, take a deep breath. What came up for you? And you'll say, it was raining that day. I'll say, and I won't try to lecture you. I'll say, okay, let's go with that. Right. All right. And then later on, you'll say, you know what? I was waiting for him to come back. Like random events, things that you suppressed, things that you didn't even recall would start rising to the surface.
Right.
Not just memories, but also actual physical discomfort. To pretty much everything that was stored in the nervous system, because that's where we store trauma. Right. And when we experience trauma, there's a disharmony between our bodies and mind, because it affects us physiologically, but also mentally as well. And trauma therapy even involves trying to teach the mind and body to both speak the same language again so that you can connect.
Wow.
That's why oftentimes a symptom of trauma is an inability to connect with other people, right? Whether that be our kids, our spouse, because we have to first do the realignment within ourselves so that we can connect with others.
Okay. Yeah. I mean that, and so let's talk about the flash technique.
Sure.
Because that right there, you guys, I'm telling you, we were in the middle of Starbucks in a meeting.
I remember.
Right. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. And then you did it. And I was like, whoa. And I went the next weekend and I've tried it on a couple of clients. Because I don't feel so comfortable in doing that yet, that I haven't been practicing, but go ahead and tell me about the flash technique.
Flash technique was, by the way, all EMDR and flash technique, these are all evidence-based. What that means is it's not something I looked up on Wikipedia and gave it a try.
Or Google.
They've been vetted.
But and Dr. Google, everybody wants to Dr. Google everything.
Or one of these social media therapists who've never got their degree, but they're always giving you clinical advice.
Yeah.
It's been vetted by all the top researchers, mental health professionals. It was started by a gentleman named Philip Manfield, who's actually still alive. And he actually still teaches the course out on the West Coast, California. And it activates the same part of the brain, the limbic system, while distracting you with a happy memory. And you do these blinks every couple of minutes, every couple of seconds or so. And typically you would think of a disturbing thing, notice where you feel it physically in your body, and then we'll jump from there to a happy memory, like your wedding day, your favorite pet, the day you got your dream job.
Right.
And then when we're done, it takes about 5 minutes. We recheck the body and the mind, see how you felt about that disturbance, and you'll notice it lessen drastically. And now we usually do 2 rounds of it, and people are like, whoa. And I tell them, everything I do, science could explain it. It's not some illusion or magic trick I pulled out of my back pocket, but the research shows it activates the same part of the brain where our fight or flight response is at. So that's why it's effective. The benefit of flash technique is that you don't feel the physical discomfort and overwhelming emotions like you typically would with other trauma modalities like EMDR. But it all depends on what the client needs at the time. So I kind of look at it like it's just another thing in my toolbox to help people push through, because when helping people process trauma, you run into a lot of dissociation, which is the unhealthy beliefs and thoughts we formed along the way in order to help that helpless little child inside of us to feel a sense of safety and connection. Yeah.
I mean, and that's where, like, I just had Dr. Barnhill, who's a DID expert. And I know that I tried to consult with you with that too, because, I'm not a DID expert. I will never claim right now, unless God's saying, go do that. But at this moment, it's like trying to understand it even more, because that, where'd you go to school?
Capella.
Okay. And so so it was a secular school, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's like our training in college, like in the halls of the university, right?
Yes.
Does not truly prepare us in the mental health field with the uniqueness of each client and their thumbprint.
I agree.
Okay. And so that this right now, I think I'm talking to like the registered intern that's listening to us, or someone really new in the field that might be overwhelmed, or like, what would you say to them? How can you encourage that listener that is wanting to be a therapist, right? Because it's just like, if we go into community mental health, because that's where we started, right? So just share with me a little bit about how you started in this field.
Sure. Well, I think I talk about this in my book, Trauma Stories. My master class didn't start in counseling school. It started as a decade as a special needs middle school teacher.
Wow.
Because I had a chance to get an up-close personal look at intergenerational trauma. All of my kids with their myriad of issues and comorbidity things, I looked at the parents when I would meet with them, and I said, I see it. It makes sense. I didn't have all the counseling terminology yet, but I saw the connection. I saw patterns, right? So when I started school and left, a lot of this was head knowledge. It wasn't really applicable how to use it in the real world. I'll be honest with you. It almost felt like you're back in undergrad. I'm just trying to retain this information to regurgitate it for these papers, for this exam.
Right.
But when I came into the field, I had a great opportunity at the time. This place is no longer open. In South County, there's a mobile crisis unit, right? At South County. But on the north end in Palm Beach County, there used to be one called Jerome Golden Center, right? And I interned with them. I did my practicum and internship with them. So I was with the mobile crisis team. I got some of the most wildest calls. I remember getting called out to my first murder-suicide.
Wow.
And we're helping to debrief with the family.
Oh no.
I would get called out where someone's having a schizophrenic episode, and they're getting Baker acted, which if you're not in Florida listening, that's a way to involuntarily hospitalize somebody that's either a danger to themselves or to someone else. That's a Florida thing, started by a woman named Mary Baker back, I think, in 1981, right? But I got all these calls and even at schools, and it was like, whoa, right? So it really gave me an opportunity to really dissect what area field I wanted to go into. I wasn't sure at the time, but I didn't realize it was all trauma-based, right? So I graduate from there, and then I worked at a group home place for about 2 years where I saw a lot of traumas in the teens that were there with the foster families.
I believe it.
Still didn't really know how to help them, right? Because I noticed the encouraging advice I would give was not really sticking, right? Because the issues were deeper. And then I bounced around community mental health, several different agencies. And then I realized, like, trauma is what I want to go into when I started doing my own work at my last community mental health stop at the time. And I went to EMDR therapy for myself. Because in my book, I talk about a lot of things I went through that when I started healing and processing, I realized, okay, God, this is what I want to do the rest of my life.
Oh, I love it.
And I've been on the journey ever since.
And I highly recommend his book.
Thank you.
Okay, I will put it in the show notes.
And the audiobook will be out next week.
Oh, how exciting. Oh my gosh, good for you, Marcken. Okay, so here's a question that I don't know. Hopefully it doesn't. All right. As a Black therapist, your journey likely encompasses unique experiences and perspectives shaped by your upbringing.
Yes.
Okay. Could you share some of the significant insights or differences you observed growing up and how those experiences influence your approach to therapy today?
Sure. I think, within the Black and brown community, you have a lot of subcultures, and mine is I'm of Haitian descent. But being that I grew up in America, it's like I've seen both cultures, African American and also my Haitian culture.
I hear you.
And I think the one thing that's synonymous within both cultures is this sense of what happens within this family. We don't talk about it, right? Because oftentimes it comes with the stigma, shame of what will others think about us if they knew the things uncle's dealing with, or your aunt's dealing with, or your parents or your siblings, right? So there was this underlying rule. No one ever said flat out, don't ever go to therapy, but it was almost like we knew because we were so taught to not say anything. And it's not like our family was harboring this deep secret, but that was just the norm. So this idea of vulnerability being a strength was very foreign to me. It wasn't until I started doing my own work. So I noticed whether it's the African American culture or the Caribbean culture, there's this sense of figuring it out by myself. And when I do talk about my trauma, it's looked at as a badge of honor. Sometimes I would also see in whether it's African American or Caribbean culture, we don't even know it's trauma, but the things we say and believe, we've contextualized it into our personality. We'll say stuff like, "Oh, I don't have a lot of friends because I just don't trust people." You got to be ready. And
we justify it. We justify the pain in a way, right? Like
exactly.
Because I'm a brown girl. If you don't know that, and even though I don't sound it, sorry, it was that bad. But I'm just saying, like in my culture, that's it. And it was just like, I think because I grew up with a lot of spirituality and in other episodes, I talk about that. But it's like, wait, you have something wrong? Well, you're not praying enough. You don't have enough faith, or it's the devil.
Absolutely.
So how do you and that's the Caribbean side of me that I remember hearing that a lot.
One thing I do is I remove the shame for the person having to hear that, and the shame for the person saying that. Because the person saying that, if they have a faith background, which, I'm a Christian too, so I get it, they mean well.
Yeah.
They're helping with the best that they have within their toolbox.
That's right.
Not realizing that we can't limit God to just, let's just pray about it. Let's just get in the word. And that has its place. It's very helpful. I'm not minimizing that. But oftentimes when I expand their perspective of how God heals, last time I checked, if I have a medical need, God never told me, do not go to my doctor. Do not go to my surgeon.
Right.
Like he allows a place for medicinal care as well, but we don't give that same grace and respect for mental health because we look at it like, oh no, this is all spiritual. It can never be. We don't need no clinician, and sometimes that's out of a fear. It's out of, because there's a lot of things being integrated that has other spirituality components, and I think it's a fear of, as a Christian, what am I embarking on? Right. Is this safe, God? Is this going to grieve you? So there's that fear component, and I think what helps to push back against that is where there is more Christian therapists with a clinical background who could help with the psychoeducation piece.
Yes.
Not that we're telling them do this type of therapy, but what if we properly educated you on everything, and says this is what for your particular issue you should look for this type of therapist, and this is what this type of therapy modality involves. Yes. So I think that this is why I love speaking, because the educational piece really opens up someone's understanding and perspective on mental health. Because I say this, whether you want to talk to a therapist or not, you're still going to have to deal with it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's also like a lot of people, and I know like culturally, when you talk about either mental health, like even in my own, when I'm a mental health counselor, and they're like, oh, you just deal with the crazies. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the stigma. That's Absolutely. What gets me fired up. That's why I'm here doing this, because I need people to understand that what we do is not just about mental illness, because just look at the word illness. You're alone.
Absolutely.
In it, right? That's why it turns to wellness when we're in community, when we're talking about it, when we're having conversations like this, to understand that there is a way to heal.
Absolutely. And for those who, going back to psychoeducation, let's remove the word mental and just add physical. Mental health, mental illness. Physical health, physical illness. It hits differently, because at the end of the day, we all have a mental health, same way we all have a physical health.
Exactly.
Either you're in great shape, you're moderate, or you're in horrible shape. And with our mental health, if you have a brain, you have a mental health. Now, mental illness is when the issues have gone from maybe moderate to severe, or from mild to moderate, right? And you may need some other interventions, which is okay. But most of the people with a mental who needs to check in on their mental health, you would never know. They're working people, go to work every day, take care of their kids. They sit next to you at church.
Yep.
They smile, but beneath that smile, there's a lot that they're carrying.
Yes.
And but the thing, this is where we can't hide trauma. It shows up in all our relationships.
Yeah.
It shows up in how we parent. It shows up on, how people's, it's not so much logical, but it's mainly how things make us feel.
Okay.
So if we're friends and I promise that, you know what, Diana, I'm going to come through for this podcast. In an hour from now, I call you and I text you and say, I'm sorry, Diana, my kid has an emergency. I got to take him to the ER.
Right.
Logically, that's a legitimate excuse, reason, but inside it may bring up feelings of abandonment that weren't really processed from childhood.
Ooh.
So now you're
preaching.
You're left with this heaviness, like, I get it, Marcken, but why do I feel so alone right now and hurt? Right. Because something's activated within you, a wound that wasn't really healed, that has nothing to do with our podcast.
Right.
But now you're offended at me because you haven't made the connection.
Yes.
That, you know what?
It's like road rage.
It is.
Right?
Road rage had nothing to do with who cut you off.
Yes.
It's who shamed that person when they were 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So helping them see that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, this is good stuff. We probably could sit here and talk all day, So What hope is there for someone who has been stuck in a diagnosis, or labels that society puts on them? And what encouragement can you give them?
You know, the hope and encouragement I could give is that, number one, healing is not linear. So don't ever compare your healing journey to someone else. But I'm not really big on diagnosis. I mean, I know because I'm a licensed clinician, we use that as a guide.
Yes.
But I don't look at a diagnosis and say, oh, you got borderline,
right.
You're a lost cause.
Right.
You got bipolar, you're not taking your medicine, just,
right.
There's no hope for you. I look at it like, keep doing what you're doing and let's keep doing the work and watch how you blossom. If you stay committed to the process. Right. And I've seen people blossom in ways that if I said it on this podcast, you probably wouldn't even believe me. So that's why I don't put a lot. I am so, maybe God made me somewhat naive when I came into this field. I don't care how wild the situation is, how hopeless it looks.
Yeah. Bring
it. Let's work with it. Let's see how far we get.
Right.
And my clients almost look at me like I'm this used car salesman trying to sell them a hustle, but I mean it. I truly believe whether it's schizophrenia, borderline, you bring the heaviest stuff, as long as you're alert to know where you can orient time, place, you know where you're at, you can somewhat function. Let's do the work. Let's see what happens.
Right. And sometimes I realize with some of my CPTSD clients that they might get worse. And I tell them, I'm like, you might get worse because you've been hiding these things so deep within and you're just managing symptoms all these years.
Yes.
And now we're going to get to the core issue of the symptom and it's going to hurt because it's like bringing out an infection that we need to heal. And some go and do the work and you're right. Like I could talk about, and then others they get stuck in the fight, flight, freeze or fawn.
There you go.
And they're not ready. And then maybe a year goes by and then they're like, I'm ready now.
Absolutely. I want to comment on, there's a huge difference between PTSD and complex PTSD.
Yes.
PTSD, for those who've never heard it, but would hear the initials, don't know what it means. Post-traumatic stress disorder. We typically started seeing that a lot with war veterans, but the research is showing most of the people with PTSD have never been to war. They're not even in the military. They're average people who've gone through a plethora of issues that they never really dealt with. Yeah. But complex PTSD is like a salad bowl of a lot of different traumas, right? It's not just one major thing that traumatizes you. And with the complex PTSD patients, they sometimes feel like EMDR is not working because their immediate approach is, why am I not getting better? And I have to tell them, this is this deep foundational trauma that a lot of it happened your early formative years. Right. You got to be a little patient. You're not going to go through something that had you stuck for decades and come out of it in a month.
Right.
So I tell them, be a little patient. It takes a little longer, but it'll work. So that's what I want to say for complex PTSD. It's a little bit more tougher, but you can still push through it.
I actually did an episode just on ACEs and CPTSD that should be coming out in 2 weeks.
Awesome. I'm going to look out for that one.
Okay. And also I just want the listener to know, because what happens is a lot of people are scared. I see this a lot because I'm like, you can hold both bases in your hand where you understand that your childhood, because they still want to love their parental or their caregivers. And I'm not blaming them because it's intergenerational.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to get them to understand, like, no, we're learning where these wounds happen. You might have to go through a little time of blaming and being the victim just to heal. And then we move past that and grow from what we went through. And then that's the healing, when you can be that wounded healer, or you see what I mean? So can you?
Absolutely. A lot of my clients, especially I could speak from the African-American and Caribbean context, there's a sense of not being honest with what happened with their caregivers or parents because they almost feel like they're being disloyal.
Yeah, betraying.
And I tell them, like, all you're doing is telling the truth, and two things could be true. You love your caregivers and parents, but they hurt you and damage you in a lot of ways. The goal is not to shame them.
Exactly.
Right? The goal is to say, if you can finally say what you've been hesitant to say all these years, right? Because we have that natural attachment, which is connection to our parents as little kids, and we don't ever want to lose that. So almost feel like we're disconnecting that by being honest. But what typically happens when you're honest with what occurred and you do the work, now you can see it from a different perspective. Not that you're condoning your parents' behavior, but you could say, they were traumatized too. They've been through a lot. Mom was a single mom. You actually started feel more compassion for them. Right. Doesn't mean you condone whatever they did to you, but you're seeing it from a different perspective, because now you're no longer looking at your experience like as a victim, but now you're healing. There's more victory. There's more sense of purpose behind it. And you never get there if you're not honest, right? Because you got to be honest in order to heal.
And it's because it's a scary place to go. It's uncharted trails. There you go. Right? Yeah. And you're trying to figure this out. And now you because most of us, like I know I have CPTSD, right? Yes. And so it's like, I want control because I had no control as a child, right? Everything was so dysfunctional. And so I want control. And now I'm realizing, no, it's letting go and understanding that, I'm not there anymore. And what have I learned from it, and how can I help the next generation?
Absolutely. That you're right on point, Diana, with that. I also wanted to say where that comes from. As kids, Gabor Mate talks about that. Our two basic fundamental needs are attachment, connection, and authenticity. Not authenticity to just say and do whatever you want.
Right.
Because everyone has a different definition with that word. Yes. So I want to be clear what I mean by that.
Right.
But to authentically express all the God-given emotions you were created with, whether even anger, because anger has a place. Yes. It could be healthy, right? But oftentimes as kids, we're taught early on, Marcken, why are you crying? Big boys don't cry. Not in this family. Oh. So if emotions were a crayon box, I take out crying, I throw it away. Yep. Because I'm not going to lose my connection to my parents. If they don't want that, then I got to get rid of it. If I get angry and I'm scolded for it, anger got to go too. So the kid learns to abandon their natural emotions for connection, right? So as they grow up, there's this sense of, I'll do whatever it takes to not feel like I can't depend on my parents. So when the parents become abusive or start to neglect them, it's easier for the child to think it's their fault. Yeah. Because if I believe it's my fault, I still have hope that my parents could change and I could work my way to perform better to stop it. But if it's reversed and I see it from the perspective, I'm a helpless child stuck with, I'm innocent, but my parents are the perpetrators. Now I'm completely helpless. And now, everything's gone. There's this sense of helplessness. There's this sense of, there's no purpose in living anymore. And this is where the mind begins to dissociate, unfortunately.
And go into really dark places.
Yes.
So on that note, do you have any kind of Bible verse or wisdom for the listener to be really encouraged and understanding that there is hope?
Yes. I believe Matthew 22:37 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes.
Why would God put mind in there?
Ooh.
He put heart and soul. Maybe he put mind because he cares about your mental health. Because he knows that the more this heals, your relationship with him will be better.
Yes.
And your relationship with others will be healthier, because now you're seeing everything through a clearer perspective. The fog is removed, which is the trauma. The trauma distorts our view, right? So I'm really, that's one verse that really hits home. Another one I believe is in 1 Thessalonians 5. Paul is writing to the Thessalonian church, and he says something about, that our whole spirit and soul and body would be made blameless, kept blameless. And that soulish part, really, if you break that down, that's really the mind, will, and the emotions, right? Because when we're traumatized, for example, if I give my life to the Lord, that relationship with Jesus, that's my spirit, right?
Yeah.
But I can still have a plethora of traumas, which are still impacting my mind. The intrusive thoughts, what I'm thinking about, my emotions, how I feel, right? So if two things are true, I love the Lord, but there's a lot of things I'm wrestling to work with.
Yeah.
Why not deal with that so I could deepen my love and connection with the Lord?
Yes. No, that makes sense. We can have Jesus and a therapist.
Absolutely.
Right?
Because we have Jesus with our doctor, right?
True.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. So, Marcken, where can our lovely audience find you?
They can find me, first of all, social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm at Bedrock Counseling. And on IG, Instagram, I'm at Bedrock Counseling. And my name, I have another handle, at Marcken Volmy. First and last name is a little unique. Marcke, N as in no, Volmy, V as in Victor, OL, M as in money, Y as in Yankee. And on those handles, you'll find all my website information.
Right.
So I know people are more likely to go to your social media handle than your website.
Yeah.
So if you go on my handle, you'll find my website,
I
Bedrock
think it
Counseling.
depends on their age, honestly.
That's true. So my website is Bedrock, like the Flintstones. If you watch the Flintstones back in the 80s, bedrockcounseling.com. And I have another one because I do also do EMDR consultation for other therapists looking to do consultation hours. If you're trying to go further in your knowledge of it, that's my website, my name, marckenvolmy.com.
Okay. So, and I'll put everything in the show notes, guys.
Cool.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And for you lovely listeners, remember to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.